In an era where a single data breach can cost a company millions of dollars and damage their reputation overnight, cybersecurity is mission critical. And Walner is an expert at securing systems that empower the world's largest company. As a product manager at Microsoft, Walner leads API and DevOps security in the cloud and keeping systems safe. Today, I want to dive deep into his first-hand experience doing that and try to find out, all of the different pieces that make that come together in this role so that if that's a role that you're interested in, you can learn from his experience. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. Very excited to talk about everything you mentioned and more.
I definitely found a lot of your background information, just as we were chatting backstage, so to speak, interesting. So why don't you share for the audience, like, your journey into tech and, what that has looked like, maybe some of the ups, some of the downs, and before we kind of like dive deeper into your experience in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from New Jersey, graduated from NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, with a mechanical engineering degree back in 2016. My first job out of college, I actually worked as a product engineer for a company called Cummins. I was making filters that go on diesel engines. Fast forward a little bit, 2019, I go to Afrotech. That leads to me networking and meeting people, and then I end up getting an interview at Nesby to work for Microsoft. So I ended up getting a job at Microsoft in 2019, and I moved to Seattle to work at Microsoft at the headquarters. And I worked there as a product manager on the machine learning security team, the cloud security. And after about 2 years of doing that, I worked in the identity organization. So I made a switch and I came to Atlanta, where I am currently. You said some of the ups and downs. I guess it's my full story. In 2023, I was actually impacted by layoffs at Microsoft. And then I ended up getting another role working at a startup. And after about a year working at the startup, now I work back at Microsoft right now.
So even in like, I want to maybe say, not necessarily like a Cinderella story, but sometimes you have to take a detour, right? Even like on the journey.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think what's interesting to me, like right away, right, is like your, mechanical engineering background, starting that in your career and then making that pivot. What were some of the things that, in your view or your experience help you make that switch?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that helped me make the switch was focusing on transferable skills. One thing I will say is that, when I first started working in mechanical engineering, I pretty much was just focused on learning as much as I can. Something like computers and different types of technology was something that was always very interesting to me. And one thing I learned as I got a real professional job in mechanical engineering was that it was very grounded. And yeah, you can think big, but um, the way that you can think at scale at a tech company was something that really interests me. So just thinking about systems as well as figuring out how things work is something that always interested me. So being focused on, bigger systems, bigger scales, more people, more users was something that really interests me. And I think it helped me transition.
That's such an amazing story. And you know, kind of like thinking back to that journey because I think majority of the people who watch the show listen to this that's kind of like in the bucket that they are probably like outside of tech looking in or maybe even kind of like maybe already have like skills like you did but trying to because again being a product engineer at Cummins and being a product manager at Microsoft probably have some similarities but they're not like necessarily like the most natural thing. So what were some of the challenges in that? And I think one of the opportunities you met was like focusing on the transferable skills. But what were maybe potentially other things that also help make that switch easier, not easy?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things you learn, like in engineering school, and I'm sure in a lot of different professions, is like how to learn, right? So when the opportunity came to me, one thing that I realized that I had to do was learn the material, right? Like there's people who go into these kinds of roles who study for 4 years, deep inside of these subjects. So when the opportunity started to get real for me, what I did was pretty much do self-learning. Right? I took a crash course in computer science. I had already taken the computer science course and a couple courses inside of my college degree, but when I knew I was actually going to be going to Microsoft that summer, I pretty much studied as much as I can to get caught up on all the different concepts in computer science and cloud security that was available on YouTube, as well as all the different things that I could read and find. So that's like something tangible that I did that helped me kind of get kickstarted into a career in tech.
Yeah, shout out Sean. Thanks for joining. And we have an episode with Sean. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It says Microsoft represent for sure. One of the things that you mentioned also that is interesting was right after this last Afrotech, it was getting a lot of bad rap, people who are there who are nurses, like why are they even there? They don't work in tech. But I think you make a really good point, right? Like if you're trying to break in a tech industry or an industry where you don't know, probably one of the first great things you want to do if you really want to help yourself is to go to the spot where the people who already are in the industry are hanging out. Probably sounds like a good idea. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think, when it comes to any kind of conference or gathering where people are, in a place that you want to be, the best thing you can do is, put yourself out there and get immersed inside of that environment, right? So prior to me even getting a job at Microsoft, I didn't go to Afrotech to actually get a job, right? Like I went there just to learn more about tech and to pretty much immerse myself in something that I was like not that familiar with. So I went to California at the time. I was in California, and I networked with people. Right, some companies were actually interested in my resume. I put it on the website. Some people were interested, but I didn't. I interviewed for companies. I didn't get any offers from Afrotech. But what I did was I networked with the people who pretty much were interested in me, and I followed up with them afterwards to see whether or not they would be at the NSB conference that same year. And they were actually able to get me a interview at the NSB conference directly with Microsoft. So one thing led to another, and I would say that without me going to Afrotech and networking, I probably wouldn't have gotten the streamlined opportunity at NSB like I did that year.
And you know what's so fascinating about what you just said is I think people sometimes gloss over the process. They say trust the process. Most of us really don't want to. But in your story, you said it without even necessarily saying it, because if you think about it, not meeting those people at Afrotech, maybe the NSB opportunity doesn't really come through, right? And even like doing those interviews and them not working out probably gives you a sense, right, of, maybe this is the kind of like questions that people are asking. So if I really want to get this role, I got to prepare a lot better on answering these specific questions. Because I think the biggest challenge that a lot of people going into tech is that you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you've probably done you've done a successful job interview to get in the role, but that was for that role. That was for that industry. If you're going to become a product manager in this industry, maybe a few tweaks, but you need to make those. So how important was even like that experience, right? Like breaking down maybe certain things, just like I said, the interview piece in helping you finally succeed at NSB?
Yeah, so it's extremely important, right? So I remember at my actual interview at NSB, I still remember this, right? Like they were asking me big thinking questions. I think one thing I always say is that when somebody's interviewing you, you can kind of tell when they want you to win, based upon the kind of questions they're asking and just like leaning into you as a candidate, right? So one thing that I said was that I was really focused on making sure that I understood how I think and how I go about solving problems. So those were pretty much the things that were that important to me when I was doing the interview process.
That's really amazing. So Sean actually has a question. He asked, "What's the biggest surprise you had after joining Microsoft?"
The biggest surprise that I had after joining Microsoft. I think the biggest surprise that I had was just how much everybody's figuring it out. You know, you kind of go to a place like Microsoft and you think everybody's like, a brainiac and everybody just knows all the information in the world. But there's a lot of ambiguity in everything that we're doing, right? So when you're kind of on what we call like the edge of technology, you kind of have to figure out what's next, and you have to figure out what the connections are. And even the person who has like a PhD and so and so is actually genuinely looking for you to give your input on where you think things can go, even though you might be somebody that's a little bit more junior. Everybody really is being asked to think at that level, and I think that was like a little bit surprising to me.
Yeah, that is so key because I think that's one of the things that I love the most about technology in general. I was literally having this conversation with someone earlier today about the fact that it's one of those industries where, traditional knowledge or just knowledge for the sake of it doesn't work. Like your learning has to be active, like it has to be continuous. And I think that for that reason, like people are very, I'm looking for the right word. I don't know that it's respectful, but everybody's opinion counts, just like what you're saying, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Most of the things that matter in traditional roles don't tend to matter there. Like, it's kind of like what you can bring, how much input. And I think that's very empowering, right? And I think that's kind of like echoing what you're saying as well. So, kind of like to go back to, so in terms of like your role as a product manager and your product as a product engineer, how much of that carried over and what were some of the new things that you had to learn?
Yeah, so when I was a product engineer, I was focused on, but at the time I was building actual physical products, right? And I would say some of the things that transferred over was, dealing with cross-functional teams. So in any of these kind of roles, if you're a product engineer, product manager, where you're going to be dealing with different parts of the business, and everybody's kind of expecting, not kind of, everybody's expecting for you to be the expert on the product that you're responsible for. So that right there is probably the main transferable skill, right? One thing I would say as a product manager, I would say different from my specific role that I had when I was a product engineer, is that as a product manager, I have more responsibility. So um, I am directly responsible for, pretty much the success of the product as well as the vision and where it's going to be going in the future. So that's how I think the roles differ just a little bit.
Mhm. And what are some of the things, just again, being that you've been in the role for quite some time now, what are some of the things that you think the average person who wants to transition in this role needs to succeed, from the outside looking in? Maybe even, for example, okay, we'll get to that one, but just in terms of like basic skills, what are some of those skills?
Yeah, so I think the average person, they need to be very organized. I think they need to love to learn as well as have great communication skills. I think they need to be, and when I say communication skills, that's relaying a message to someone else, as well as taking in a lot of information and gaining insights from it. I think that being able to write it down, so like good written communication skills, right? Because if you're taking a lot of information, how exactly do you compress that and deliver it to people in an effective way? When I say that you need to be able to learn, I think that, like I said, if you're going to be on the edge of technology, you're going to be pretty much casting a vision for a product for who knows, like 2, 3, 5, 10 years. You need to be able to, uh, you need to be able to know what direction is this technology headed in, and pretty much look into research and all the different avenues to gain information about a certain product. So I would think that those are like the pretty much fundamental skills that you need in order to even consider, getting into product management.
That is really key. One of the things that you and I were also talking about before, the stream was how much more like many of the product manager roles are getting more technical. You have experience in like, security and DevOps and things like that. How did you come about, building those skills?
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources that are available on the internet, right? And I think that leveraging those resources is really key. As a product manager at a company like Microsoft or any company really. You're going to be expected to do self-learning. But another advantage that you have, and something that a lot of people don't tap into, that I think I am pretty good at and help me kind of speed up quicker, is being able to leverage the knowledge of those around me, right? Building key relationships, finding out who owns what within a certain organization or within the overall company, and being able to reach out and saying, hey, can we chat for this amount of time? Like having directed questions. Having good questions is probably the quickest way to like learning anything, right? So having questions prepared so that you make the best out of people's time and gain as much information as you can within that time is really going to help fast track your learning of any subject.
I think when you say that, my mind goes back to something that I learned, a couple years back, talking about like first principles thinking. And I think, asking questions was a key element of that framework, right? Because again, just for people who are not fully aware, like first principles thinking is like this idea of breaking problems down to their first principle. And I think one of the most famous examples that was used for this I thinking was like, how Tesla was able to build the kind of car batteries that they used in their cars. Because initially when they started to think about car batteries, it started off as just the kind of everyday ones that we use in the cars, and stacking all those together was kind of like the way they were thinking about it, and it was going to be too expensive. But then they had to break it down, was like, how much does this cell of battery cost, and
Mhm.
how do we pack it in a way that we can make it cheaper, and all of those things. So I think how that applies to kind of like what you're speaking to is like, if you're thinking about a problem, don't just think about it like from that last solution phase, but like, are you breaking it down to where it's like, this thing has three different parts. If I solve for each one individually, or I just think about the baseline for it, maybe when I even come to the answer, I'm not coming back to this answer that has this many problems, right? Because I've already, split out all the things I don't need to be there. I've taken out all the fluff. It's kind of like the thinking, and I thought that was really fascinating. So yeah, I do like that about questions for sure.
100%. I think something that you said also leads to another key aspect of product management that I forgot to mention earlier, but that's prioritization, right? So being good at understanding what needs to get done today versus what can be done tomorrow is a key aspect of being a successful product manager. You're going to always be pulled in countless directions. There's always going to be all these conflicting priorities, and having the insight based upon your knowledge as well as all the different information that you're taking in, to be able to say that this is what's most important and this is what we can probably ship sooner, and all the different items that go into doing correct prioritization is actually extremely important to be effective and get things shipped.
So, cybersecurity specifically, I think is one of the hottest topics in tech. You know, you literally see like a million people selling courses about, get into cybersecurity in 90 days. But how has that journey and experience been like for you? And, you know, especially like, being in the intersection of security and product, what does that world look like?
Yeah, so I think being in part of cybersecurity has been a blessing. I think it's opened up my mind in ways that I didn't think before. Right. One of the things that I love the most about cybersecurity is the fact that there's never an end to the work that needs to be done. Right. So for every solution that we come out with, the next challenge and the next question is, well, how do we secure it? Right. And when you think about what that means for a product manager is constantly being in tune with what's happening inside of the world of not only just cybersecurity, but in the world of computing in general, and finding out ways to pretty much make it easier to help people secure, right? So, uh, right now, as a cybersecurity product manager, we create products that help people secure their environments, right? So that's something that before the advent of a cloud security provider, every company would have to pretty much manage their security by themselves. That takes a lot of that takes a lot of energy for IT professionals and security professionals in each one of those companies to manage their own security stack, updating all their servers, all these things to make to make their environment secure. So, as a product manager, what we're trying to do pretty much is figure out ways to make it easier for them to stay focused on remediating and the devs to fix what needs to be done, rather than worrying about managing all of the different security parts of their environment.
Mm. And when you talk about that, one of the things that comes to mind is almost like kind of like thinking about the product manager framework. Speaking of like kind of like the P0 to P3s, in terms of like how new people coming into product, maybe using your experience, like how much focus goes into like building net new features and how much focus goes into like, just, day-to-day operational stuff or like fixing bugs. And how should like people prepare, to even make those decisions or how to like, deal with that kind of situation if it arises in their careers?
Yeah, so it's always a balance, right? Because you always want to make sure that if you're gonna work, you want to work to be the best. So you're gonna want to be able to deliver the most value for your customers, and value is something that you always want to increase over time. So the way that typically happens is by releasing new features and new products, so that people can do more, or have more time to do other things other than security. So as far as, what was the second part of the question?
The second part is like, just how people prepare in terms of skills wise, how to deal with that.
Yeah, so I think it's like I said earlier. I think you got to get really good at prioritization. You kind of got to be able to do a cost benefit analysis, right? For the energy that we would take, right? We call it costing in product management, right? So if let's say we have a feature and we know that this feature is going to take, I don't know, 10 engineers 10 weeks to do, we have to determine whether or not that feature is going to be worth it based upon what we would get on the back end, versus can we do something like, let's say if we had something, I think what you asked was about things that we have currently and maintaining that versus working on new stuff. So if we know we have what we call technical debt, right? Technical debt is things that need to get done but haven't gotten done, and because of the way we built things on the infrastructure that happened prior. So if we know that there's technical debt that needs to take care of, then maybe we can focus those 10 engineers, and what we would get out of those 10 engineers for 10 weeks would actually give us more benefit in the end than what this new feature would. That right there is something you would, weigh against each other to figure out what's most important. So you kind of got to do a cost benefit analysis, like, weigh the opportunity cost based upon how much energy and effort it would take in order for you to accomplish either one of those goals.
Yeah, and that's really amazing because I think a lot of times people talk about transferable skill, but of course, not anybody's fault, but it's hard to kind of like put that into perspective because this type of thing, we make those kind of decisions every day, whether you're a product manager or not. But kind of like thinking about the framework, just as you're talking about, I think it probably even makes it more clear. So yeah, thank you for that. And we've been rocking for about 20 something minutes. So if you're just joining the stream, welcome. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with friends. Leave any questions you have for Walner in the chat, and we'll get to all the questions. And then feel free to share. We're always here every Thursday with someone new, trying to break down, tech roles, how to break in, etc. So we have a question from Parker, and the question is, what side of course would you go to take? Would you go take first? Yeah, to get started in cybersecurity.
Yeah. So me, when I was first getting started, I was definitely a part of YouTube University. So one thing I really suggest is there's this thing called Crash Course in cybersecurity, or Crash Course. If you just type it in to YouTube, you find it. And that right there is, I think YouTube is a great resource. There's tons of people giving out a lot of information. I watched college courses on YouTube. So just like, what people pay for to go and attend in college, I watched that stuff on YouTube in order for me to get caught up. Also, because I knew I was going to Microsoft at the time, I learned stuff off of Microsoft Learn. So Microsoft Learn has a bunch of different courses that anyone can take to kind of learn anything they want about various topics, as many as you can think of. Um, so that's what I would that's what I did when I was getting into cybersecurity.
And is Microsoft Learn free?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, so your work with API and DevOps. My question is, how do you even learn the basics of that, right? Because one of the things that we're talking about is that product roles are getting a bit more technical, right? And it makes sense, right? Because if you're a company, you don't want that to be there's that much of a knowledge gap, within your Scrum teams, your engineers, and your product people. You kind of like want some shared context. So, and maybe to break that down to the average person working is that like you learning about cybersecurity or DevOps or APIs doesn't mean that you have to go and write code. I mean, it probably helps if you can, but that's not really an expectation. But you definitely want to be at par in terms of like common terminologies, common understanding of principles, common understanding of ways of doing, right? Just so that like, if you guys are collaborating, things are just moving a lot faster. So first of all, maybe help me understand what that looks like as much as possible. And then second of all, like how do you come up to speed on those different things, given that like you're not, a software engineer to begin with?
Yeah. So the best way I think to learn anything is really to just immerse yourself in it, right? So you can look at as many YouTube videos you want, you can talk to as many people as you want. But until you try to go in there and do something functional, I think it's gonna be hard for you to say that, like, you really know what's going on. So that right there was something I actually struggled with when I joined this most recent role. Prior to working in this most recent role that I started about a year ago, I wasn't focused on APIs or DevOps security. These are things that I knew about, but any role as a product manager is going to require you to go deeper and become a subject matter expert on that role. So that right there is one of the challenges you're always going to have anytime you switch context as a product manager. So one thing that I did to be able to go deep is to play around with it myself, right? So if I task myself, like, how exactly do I deploy this API? And then I go into the Microsoft portal or the Azure portal and I try to figure out how exactly to deploy it myself. How do I, simulate an attack on this API, right? I figure out how I can do it myself. And through that process of me trying to do it myself, I'm going to run into roadblocks. And those roadblocks are opportunities for you to learn. So I say you got to keep on running into those roadblocks by constantly trying to apply whatever the knowledge is that you've learned. And over that process, I think you're going to learn a lot of things. Another thing is, if you have the opportunity to actually be working in one of these roles, any role in product management, you have to try to just take on a project, right? And it can seem a little daunting at first, because you want to deliver and you want to be able to, give it your best shot and pretty much do your best at anything that you're given. But you want to be able to just dive in and take on the responsibility of something that you might not fully know. But as you try to solve the problems, you're going to be able to ask the right questions as well as seek out the information yourself in order to be able to learn. And slowly over time, you'll realize that, wow, I know a lot more about this than I would have thought given where I started.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely very scary because I know exactly how that feels, but I think it's always the best way, right? Because at that point, like it's like, all the gloves are off, all the bets are off. I mean, when failure stares you deep in the face, that's really like the moment where you know what you're made of, right?
Yeah.
So I think learning that way is definitely very, very brave, but it's kind of like also one of the best ways to do it. Um, so given given like you've been successful at interviewing in multiple roles, Microsoft twice, by the way. What are some of the things that recruiters, hiring managers, panels are looking for in candidates when they're conducting these interviews?
I've always told people when they ask me for interview advice, I think the number one thing that you need is confidence, right? And I think people can sense confidence immediately. And if you're struggling with confidence, the problem is most likely that you aren't sure of what you know, you know? And I think that a recruiter, anybody who's interviewing you, they can instantly feel when you feel confident about what it is that you're saying. And I think that me being somebody who's interviewed people before, and I, like you said, I've done a lot of interviews. I know that it's very important for you to be speaking confidently on whatever it is that you're talking about, right? So if somebody asks you about an experience that's on your resume, that's not something you should have to double think about. It's your life, you lived it. Speak about it confidently. And if you have, let's say, something that you don't know, one thing I'm a big proponent of is saying what I don't know, but also leaving leaving a sense of I'm gonna figure it out with the person that's interviewing me, right? So all of that gives a sense that you're kind of grounded and you have a thought process about the way you go about things, and it's super important to be confident. Like that's the number one thing that I can tell anyone about that.
And so I think, confidence based on being able to speak to the things that you do know. But what are some other ways that people can build up that confidence?
Yeah, so practice, right? So you definitely got to practice as much as you can. That's something that I did a lot when I was interviewing. Like I said, when I was looking to, find a role when I didn't have a role, I was interviewing a lot, right? Any opportunity that came, whether or not I wanted the opportunity or not, it's like, why not practice and be able to work up my skill of answering certain questions, being prepared for different kinds of questions that I've never heard before. Every time you put yourself in that environment, you get better at understanding what can possibly come, and you slowly become better at answering questions in the moment, on the spot. And being able to answer it confidently is something that will come with time.
Mm. It's so interesting. I'm a big soccer fan, and one of the things that you see a lot, strikers are like the top man who score the goals, and confidence is kind of like what they're dealing. And it's so funny because like when you're scoring goals, you're going to be confident to score more goals, and when you're not scoring goals, you're not going to be confident, so you're not going to score goals. So I think that's kind of like what goes to what you're saying about practice, right? Like put yourself, I definitely, that resonates a lot because you don't want the opportunity that of your lifetime to be your practice moment, right? You don't want to like gloss over like the answers or then get called out or whatever, like in that specific job that you want. So practicing as many opportunities as possible, definitely that's legit. I think what's also closely tied to that is resumes, right? Of course, like we now live in the world of like, tech conference. I literally sent out a tweet about this today about, getting a job in the 90s was easy. You see a hiring ad, you drop off your resume, you'll mail it in, whatever the case may be. You get maybe a 1 day on-site interview, rotate, and then you have a job, and then you stay in that job for 20 years, right? But now it's like you have to have a LinkedIn profile, you have to have a portfolio, you have to have a resume, you have to go to conferences, you have to build a personal brand. Then you have to get a job, and then you might get laid off, or you might get tired, and have to do it over again. So it's a continuous process, right? But that first piece, having a resume, I don't think that has changed much, right? And maybe it's even changed for the worse because now we live in the world of AI, both on the candidate side and on the hiring side. So how do you build a winning resume in this moment?
Yeah, so I think the key is really, well, one, I think one thing that I'm a big proponent of is actually soliciting help. you know, so if you build that network like we spoke about earlier, speaking to somebody who's in the role to get a better understanding of what exactly do people want, um, and tailoring your resume to that, right? So when you look at a job description, looking at what the requirements are, what the preferred qualifications are, and being able to see what experiences you have that speak towards it and really speaking the same language as what the job description might be saying. As well as, like I said, if you have people in your network, have somebody look over your resume. And if you don't have people in your network, pay for somebody to look over it, right? Like, I think it's a good investment if you ask me. to make sure that you're putting your best self forward, right? These are the things that speak for you when you're not speaking yourself, right? So your LinkedIn, for example, is always working for you, right? How many times you wake up and 10 people have added you on LinkedIn, you don't know who they are, but it's because you've already put yourself out there in a way that tells people who you are when you're not around. So when you do that, putting the effort in to make sure that what it is you are portraying online or in any kind of document is to the best of its ability and speaks to the highest form of what it is that you're able to produce.
That's facts right there, and I like the idea because that's another principle that I like. This idea of things that scale and that work even when you're not, right? Because like you rightly said, you could be sleeping and your LinkedIn is still doing the work for you. Um, we touch on networking. There's a right and wrong way to do it, right? What are some of the wrong ways and what are some of the right ways to do it?
Yeah, so I personally approach networking from the standpoint of, adding value, right? I believe in just network effects in general. And I also believe in, you know, things will come when they're supposed to come, right? So I don't approach networking too transactionally. I think that my general philosophy is to, like, cast a wide net, right? You never know who's going to be available, who's going to be beneficial to you in the future. So even if it's somebody who doesn't even work in what you're working in now, you never know who might be beneficial later on. One example I can give is, when I got laid off, I had people who I had never actually physically met, people who I've connected with who aren't in the tech industry, and just people who, I don't know, I didn't even know that, were looking to help me out in finding another role and pretty much helping me get to the next part or next phase of my career, whatever that was. So I think, some people might think, be super targeted. I see this person, I find them on LinkedIn, I find out where they're staying. Like, I don't think you need to do all that. I think you never know who can help you. And I think that the network effects of everything, I truly do believe in that. So as long as you're being genuine about, who you are, what it is you're looking for, and also what it is that you can provide, I think making sure that you're a value adder is something that is extremely important in terms of networking in a genuine way.
So it's so funny. Parker dropped this earlier, but I'm just gonna plug this here because like that was such an amazing answer. So thank you so much for the amazing answer. I think if I could do like a 3-minute masterclass in networking, I think that's what it will be. One of the things that you touched on that I really want to amplify is two things I think is so critical. It's like, especially if you're new to tech, I think anyone and everyone around you should know that you're making that move, you're making that play. Because just like you said, there's so many resources around you. Maybe even people who are not in tech, they might be on healthcare, but do they know someone who's in tech who, just by the virtue of you mentioning it to them, they can say, oh, this other person is also trying to do cybersecurity, but I know you already work there. Can I connect you? And that's important. They may not be the direct person to help you, but just because you're building that brand, and that's the second piece, right? Like I always say, like, if I'm starting a new career as a data analyst today, I'm not going to put aspiring data analyst, right? I'm a data analyst today. I decide I want to be a data analyst. I might not all the way there have the skills for it, but I don't think I'll ever get there anyway, right? Like, because the field will change, the tools will change, but I want to put it out there. I'm not trying to be deceptive. I'm going to be honest, like I'm learning this, I'm doing that, but I think there's also a mindset in there. And once you build it and share it, just like you said, all those people looking to help is because they know your story in one way or the other, right? So if you kept all of that to yourself, then they're gonna like just go about their busy lives. So I think those 2 to 3 things that you mentioned, I think are extremely key for anybody who wants to be successful. And I think kind of like to the point, right? If we live in this world of AI bots writing resumes on the one hand and AI is in the ATS kicking them out, one way to kind of like get beyond that is to be more human, right? Human connection in terms of the referrals, connection, warm intros, and things like that. I think those are always going to be very, very key. Um, So thinking about this switch in general, right? Like to hit the learning barriers or to help solve it, because again, ultimately, I think one of the things that I recognize is that learning is not that easy in tech in general. Wow, look at that. learning in tech, I think once you learn to do it, just like you said in engineering school, you learned it. But it's not that easy for a lot of people, especially people coming from the outside in. So what are some of the ways that, just from like your own systematic approach on the things that you've done can make that easier? Maybe there are frameworks, maybe there's a timing thing. How have you been able to do self-learning on your own?
So for me, self-learning, like I said, it really starts with, I think you really need to understand why you want to do what you want to do. And really get into the fundamentals, right? So I like to start with the fundamentals of, what exactly is this technology trying to solve? Like asking myself that basic question. And I think understanding, the different processes that go into any technology is like really important. When you talk about, learning complex things, it's really just breaking it down into its most fundamental pieces, right? So that's really the best thing I can say about, going about learning any kind of complex thing.
And how do you also stay motivated? Because, as someone who's already working these jobs, even if you're out of a job, like, like you're going to get another job. I think the path for someone who's starting today, who doesn't even know, like, what does an interview look like and all of that, it can be a little more challenging, just to find that motivation. So how can someone new navigate that, if you have any insight?
Yeah, so I mean, another thing I always tell people when they're looking for any kind of opportunity or role or anything like that is, I think it's very important not to stay focused on one thing. I think sometimes what you're aware of is all you see, but there's a lot of opportunities outside of what you're aware of that might actually be a stepping stone to get you to that first vision that you had, right? For example, right, when I got laid off, I worked at a startup that was focused on prescription software in the healthcare industry. Never did I think I would be working in the healthcare industry working on that. But I had product management skills, and I knew I could learn most things quickly. So I was open to that opportunity, and I actually did gain a lot of new things and new experiences from that opportunity. So I think that being open to learning things that are on subject, but think outside of the box of what you might specifically be focused on. For example, right, I want to work at Microsoft in cybersecurity. That's great, but let's say you have an opportunity at, I don't know, IBM, like, take the opportunity if it comes, right? And learn what you need to learn there. And who knows what that can lead into in the future, right? Because what you really want to focus on is just gaining experience and learning as much as possible.
And it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, so in order to stay motivated, I think you gotta kind of constantly put yourself in a position to win. You know what I'm saying? And not always what it looks like to us. Sometimes we determine what winning looks like, but sometimes when you look back, it's like, wow, I've constantly moved forward, even though in that moment I probably didn't think I was moving forward. But I put myself in a position to win by allowing more than what was probably directly in my vision to be available to me, Yeah.
I think, I'm sorry, it wasn't the last one that resonated the most as this one. And I think, like, it's so interesting that you say that, because I've talked to so many people, and this is something that has come up way too many times. It's like we all kind of like start out having this broad overarching vision of what we want the future to look like. And for most people, it doesn't always turn out that way, right? But I would think that most people, even in hindsight, if they look back at it, they'll say I wouldn't have done it any other way, because there might have been challenges in the journey, but every single one of those things kind of like align to kind of like create that moment that they sit in. So yeah, that's very valid. It's like breaking it down, and I think that's where like that fundamental thinking comes in too, right? It's like instead of being just focused on a narrow goal, what do you really want to do? You want to start a career in cybersecurity. That's the overarching goal. If it does happen at Microsoft, great. But don't let like great destroy good. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't be so focused on achieving this one goal that you've never even worked at Microsoft, like for this hypothetical person, right? So you don't even know if that's what you really want to do. So why are you so fixated on achieving something that you don't even know? It'll probably feel great, but you don't know that for sure, you know, versus like maybe even going and working at a small local government, and then moving up to like a startup and then something else to get to where you really want to be, if that's what that journey looks like. So yeah, I think that's really great.
Yeah, 100%. And just to speak and elaborate even more on your question, right? You say, how do you stay motivated? I think you stay motivated by having like, an abundant mindset. I think that's, if I had to sum up what I just said, that's what I'm getting at, right? So there's a lot of opportunity, right? So if I know there's a lot of opportunity, it's easy for me to stay motivated. Versus if I think that there's only one way for me to win, that's kind of a pessimistic way to do things. So if I know that I can win in 1,000 ways, that right there is motivation to keep trying things versus, if I think I can only win in one way, that's it's gonna cause you extra stress and anxiety. So and it's gonna make you less motivated, maybe, unless you just really want to
Yeah.
try to get one thing. But there's no guarantee you'll ever,
Yep.
get one thing that you're looking for. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And have mentors played a role in your career? And what kind of roles have they played, and has that helped you advance in your career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I've had a lot of people pour into me ever since I can remember. Starting with my dad and my mom. They always told me like, I was smart. They always told me like, I would do good things. Mentors, I've had people along the journey who, just decided to pour into me for whatever reason. And that's why I try my best to do the same to others, because I know that I've had people who randomly decided that like, I want to help you and I'm going to help you along your path. And some of the things that they've done for me is like, whether it be like, when I first got to Microsoft, some people just telling me about how things work, about the interpersonal connection, about, how exactly can I best represent myself. Um, all types of, people in my life has helped me a lot in order for me to pretty much get where I am today.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I think we talked about networking, but how does it work to build a mentor relationship? And I asked that specifically because there's almost like a power imbalance, power dynamic situation there, right? Where as the mentee, you go in knowing that like you can't really offer this person anything of value. So how can you still build that relationship?
Yeah, so I think the best way to build that relationship is to really value people's time, you know? And I think value people's time and be very direct about what it is that, you'd like to know from them, right? So that means being prepared. And I think the number one thing that motivates a mentor, because me, I've been a mentor to people too. I think the number one thing that motivates a mentor is when they see that you've taken the knowledge that they've given you and you've acted upon it, right? So being forthcoming about, okay, thank you for giving me this information. This is what I'm going to do with it. Right. And it's like they may never see you again, or anything like that. But if they do by happen chance get the chance to see that, wow, like, I gave that person this information and they went and did something with it, that strengthens that mentor relationship and is gonna help build on somebody who wants to pour into you. If you can really get across the fact that the time that you're investing into me will produce tangible results for me, is something that most mentors feel good about, right? Because the number one thing a mentor doesn't want is for you to be wasting their time for something that you're never going to actually act on and deliver for yourself on. So showing that you're a self-starter, showing that you're somebody who takes in information and goes and does something with it is the best thing you can get across to somebody who you want to mentor you, but you don't have much to give them.
It's so interesting because the next point I was going to make, Sean has made it. It says the value is in taking their suggestions, trying it out in the real world, and closing the loop with them with a status of how it went. Somebody should take this and just frame it somewhere because of how important it is. I think it kind of like ties back nicely into what you said, value in your time. And this is something that I've always seen. It's that like there's no intrinsic value, so to speak, in a mentor giving their time and giving their advice beyond your success. So if they do give it, that's the only way you can pay back is by being successful. Could be in that experiment, could be in your career, could be anywhere else. And then making them feel good because you're not going to be the last person who's going to ask. So pay it back and then pay forward, right? Always go back and say, you told me this. Nobody wants to sit on a call for 30 minutes telling you something and then never ever see you again, So, yeah. So it's one of the things that I hear is that product is saturated, and I'm first of all, I'm curious to hear what you think about that. And then two, is it still worth somebody going into product in 2025?
You said that they said it's saturated? I don't think it's saturated. If anything, I think it's 1,000% worth going into 2025 and beyond. I think it's a tough thing to do. I think that as a product manager, you're asked to do tough things. Physically, like what you're actually asked to deliver is not easy, and but learning the skills of being able to deliver and doing what's necessary in order to deliver results, I think it's 100% worth learning and taking the challenge of, right? As far as saturation, I mean, I don't know about that. There's an endless amount of problems to solve, right? So, they always talk about one thing you'll hear about product management is, product managers tend to turn into CEOs, right? Because you have to think broadly and across any kind of business function or operation. And so as long as there is business challenges, there will be the need for product managers, right? So you could call it something different if you want, but as long as there's ways to improve processes, make things more efficient, deliver better results, there's always going to be a need for somebody to be thinking about those things. And that's what product managers do.
It's interesting. One of the trickiest interview questions I've ever gotten was, of course, prefaced as, we imagine that you're kind of balanced in these two things, but if you would choose one of them, which would you rank first? So it's a big picture thinking or being detail oriented. In your perspective, which is more important? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot like they did, but which is more important to a product manager?
I think I'll answer this by saying what's tougher, right? I think what's tougher is thinking big, I think getting into the details, right? I'll just say me as an engineer, you're taught to go into the details. You're taught to get into the weeds. What's the how does this work, right? Even I said it earlier, right? You want to know how things work at its most basic form in order for you to be able to deliver something. I think what's really tough for a lot of people, and me included, is really thinking about how big something can really get, and how far out there can we really go and actually hit the target. So I think that working that muscle is something that allows you to be somebody that moves the needle, right? If I can take in the information I have and be able to expand what's possible, I think that now I'm doing like amazing things versus like, going deep into the details and stuff. That can be great. Don't get me wrong. Right. Like, but being able to expand and think big and push people's thoughts of what's possible, I think that that's moving the needle as a product manager.
Yeah, I think I agree with that because my answer was also along those lines. I definitely do think that, if we're talking about project management, then I think detail orientation is definitely very key. But
Yeah.
I think that, in the world of a product manager, you're bringing so many different things together and you're not just thinking about it now, you're also thinking about the future, right? So I definitely think that, you have to have that overarching vision, even though like you might have focus from time to time. I mean, that's already what prioritization is for. But I think you can never ever like be a product manager who's just solely focused on only achieving one goal. Even if you are at the moment, like you still have to do that with one eye towards like, the bigger goal. So yeah, that definitely it tracks with what at least what I said, even though I never got the job. But that's a conversation for a different day. Um, so what does one of the reasons why I care so very deeply about this is one of the potentials that I see in tech, one being like a big value driver in the community, uh, on a community standpoint, like how maybe we can deploy technology to solve, issues that are like very specific to the community, but also like even on a personal level, like how you can use, you know, technology as a launching pad to be able to have a better life for yourself, your family, everybody else who's connected to you. What does that look like for you, and what does that look like maybe even for maybe other people that you know in tech? Like, is that true? Does that really exist?
You asked me, is it possible to use technology to make your life better? Like,
As
is
a
it
as a, as a life, yeah.
okay? Yeah, absolutely. I think that in anything we're doing, you have to figure out how you could do more with less, right? Like,
Uh,
if anything, as an engineer, that's like what your job is, right? Like, how can you do more with less? And not only that's one aspect, right? That you might call that like efficiency or optimization, right? But another thing that you think about is like repeatability, right? So like, how can I
uh,
make sure if I do something that I do it the same or to the best quality consistently, right? And so when you think
yeah,
about those kind of things, technology is like what comes in to help you do that, right? So like, let's say, I mean, like in any engineering process, right? Like, what you want to do is deliver repeatable results at a high quality, delivering the most for less, right? So definitely I say like in all aspects of my life, I try to see how could I leverage things to do more with less. How can I make sure that when I do output anything, that I'm outputting, the best every time. So ways that I think about that is right, staying up on top of new, let's say SaaS products, or right now, the big thing is AI, right? How am I leveraging AI to be able to do more with less, as well as how am I leveraging AI or any kind of new technology to be able to make sure that I'm delivering high quality results consistently.
absolutely. That's fire. And Chris, thanks for your question. I think Chris is following up on the earlier question that I had. Says, "Hey, Warner, I'm curious. After you saying that, do you think that as a product manager, you're often challenged more to think macro and big picture and work your way backwards into details?"
Absolutely. Now, what I will say is, when you work in an organization like Microsoft, uh, you know, it can be different at different times, right? So sometimes you might already have a big vision that's been cast for you, and therefore you need to get into the details of how exactly you're going to do it, right? One thing I'll say is and I value my experience that I had at the startup that I worked at was because at that role I was reporting directly to the head of product, right? And the head of product in my role at Microsoft is probably two, three, four people ahead of me, in an organizational track. So in my experience working at the startup, one thing that I realized was like, wow, like I really have a lot of autonomy to cast the vision of what this thing looks like, right? To the point where I'm even looking at which vendor are we using? Is there a software out there that can help us do this in 90 days versus doing it in 6 months? That's not the kind of thing that I've had the opportunity to do at Microsoft. So I would say that, you know, which challenges you're having often depends on where exactly you sit within your product management role.
Hello, Majek. So yeah, that really, really great answer. One of the final questions that I have, I'm sure like we can find salary information everywhere, but maybe I don't trust those sites. So what does earning potential look like for anyone who's interested in product management?
Um, earning potential goes all the way up to, who knows, right? Like potential, like I said, you become the CEO of multi-billion, trillion-dollar corporation. You could be earning multi-millions. You know what I'm saying? But not even you don't even have to be a CEO of a company to earn millions. It's very possible, right? Earning potential, let's say on a yearly percentage. I would say as a product manager, in most roles within tech companies, you could be expecting to make over 6 figures as a product manager. And depending on the company that you work for, they get paid very comparable to software engineers. So, like stocks, bonuses, all types of things like that. So product management is definitely a lucrative career, and it builds on itself. So, the more things you deliver, the more depth you go into the different things that you work on, the more valuable you become. And you get paid in coordination with that.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a really nice and amazing place for us to land it tonight. That's definitely been the show. But before we go, I definitely want to give you, first of all, I don't know if you have any more questions for us. If you have, leave them last minute before we go. But in the meantime, I don't know if you have anything to shout out, to promote. I think it's definitely the moment to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Well,
right.
first and foremost, thank you for having me on the platform. I definitely enjoyed the conversation. One thing that I'm actually focused on right now is all the different experiences and different perspectives that I have on life, whether that be professionally or personally. I'm actually working on getting those things out in a newsletter. So if you want to follow more of my different thoughts and journeys as I kind of release a lot of the things that I've learned over the years. I'm actually doing that on this platform called Substack. So I don't know, maybe we could provide them a link or
Yeah,
something.
we'll put the link in the episode afterwards.
Okay, yeah. So it's walner.substack.com. And what I'm going to be doing is pretty much giving updates I want to post and pretty much share a lot of the different experiences, right, that I've had. So whether that be, like I said, I've lived in 4 different states over the last 6 years. Getting laid off, getting back into Microsoft, working in a startup versus working in big tech. All these kind of things I kind of want to, write them down and provide that value to anybody who's willing to listen. So you can follow up on that.
Yeah, so definitely the value doesn't stop here. Go check out the Substack. We're gonna put the link below. But yeah, it's been another amazing episode of Working in Tech. Our first for the new year, by the way. So happy New Year, everyone. We're gonna be back here again next Thursday. Oh wow! So let me just put it on the screen real quickly. Yeah, I'm gonna be back here next Thursday with another episode of Working in Tech with a different guest. This year, we're actually going a bit more technical. I think that's one of the reasons why I got excited. Want to talk DevOps, cybersecurity, almost every other, technical role, some of the ones that we haven't covered before. So definitely stay tuned, share the podcast. I would look forward to seeing you next week.